in Louisiana as 7 candidates for governor square off in this statewide showdown. Jeff Landry, Shawn Wilson, Stephen Waguespack, Sharon Hewitt, John Schroder, Hunter Lundy, and Richard Nelson. From your local election headquarters, this is the Louisiana Governor Primary Debate.
Good evening. I'm your host, Susan Roesgen from WGNO News in New Orleans. Moderating tonight's debate are Dalfred Jones, anchor at KLFY News in Lafayette, Jacque Jovic, anchor at KTAL in Shreveport, and Fred Childers, chief political reporter at WVLA in Baton Rouge. We welcome our viewers across the state watching on 5 Nexstar stations and partner stations across the region, from New Orleans to Monroe to Alexandria and everywhere in between. We have a hashtag tonight where our questions and documentation are posted. We're also looking for your thoughts on the candidates. Use the hashtag LAGovDebate. Before we get started, here are the rules. Candidates will have 30 seconds each for opening statements, 60 seconds to answer each question, and if there's a follow-up, they will have 30 seconds. Each candidate will also have 30 seconds for a closing statement. When time is up, you'll hear this bell. And with that, debate night in Louisiana starts now.
Candidates, thank you so much for being here for this important statewide debate. Now, we do have 7 candidates in 1 hour, so it's important to stick to the time cues that we do give you. We're going to get started right now. Mr. Landry, you have 30 seconds for your opening statement.
All right, well, thank you. Well, good evening. You know, this morning when I brought my wife her coffee, which were only instructions her father gave me before we got married, I said, what would you like today for your birthday? And she said, look, you go out there and explain to the people of the state how hard you're going to work for them to ensure that we have a government as good as the people of this great state. So I'm looking forward to this debate.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wilson, you have 30 seconds for your opening statement.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Shawn Wilson, candidate for governor, product of a single-family home, raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, in the home that my grandmother gave my mother. I'm excited to be with you tonight as a candidate. I'm married to a wonderful educator, 23 years. We've been married for 28 years. I've got 2 kids, 2 beautiful grandkids, and I'm running to be governor to stop the divisiveness. I'm excited to have all of the candidates, specifically the Attorney General, to join us for the first time in 6 months on the stage to talk about issues that matter to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Waguespack, the floor is yours, 30 seconds.
Look, I'm running for governor because I'm worried the Louisiana way of life that we love so much is literally dying on the vine and slipping away before our very eyes. Look, we're going to talk about a lot of issues here tonight, and they're all important, but there's a question of leadership that you, the voter, must answer. Who is the leader you trust to turn this ship around? A career politician who views the office of governor as a political throne with which to rule from, or someone who views it as a public service, who wants to get in there, roll up their sleeves, work to solve problems for you and make your life easier? That's who I am, and that's how I'd like to serve you.
Thank you. Mrs. Hewitt, you have 30 seconds for your opening statement.
Thank you. I'm Sharon Hewitt, a former engineering executive in the oil and gas business, a wife, a mother, and a grandmother, and currently a Louisiana state senator. The leadership skills that I developed at Shell, along with the legislative experience that I have as a leader in the state Senate, has prepared me to be governor of the state of Louisiana during this critical time in the history of our state. I look forward to talking with you about the issues that are important to your families and the plan that I have to address them.
Thank you. Fred?
All right. Mr. Schroder, you have 30 seconds.
Well, good evening. Look, I believe Louisiana needs a CEO, somebody to manage the operation, who understands the infrastructure of the state. And I don't mean roads and bridges. I mean about providing a first-class public school system, outstanding law enforcement. But at the end of the day, it takes a leadership. But we have to address the cronyism and corruption reputation of this state that stains us. As your governor, the rules will be the rules, and access will be equal to all.
Thank you, Mr. Schroder. Mr. Lundy, your opening statements. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. Decency requires that when you make a mess, you clean it up. We have pollution that's gone unchecked in this state forever, and it's killing people. I've spent a career holding community of Mossville and the manufacturers, BP, Roundup, and others accountable. We have 740 toxic sites in Louisiana that are close to homes. The excessive floods and the storms are putting people at risk, and then we're going to stop it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lundy. Mr. Nelson, you have the floor, 30 seconds.
Hi, I'm Representative Richard Nelson. I'm 37 years old. I'm an engineer, attorney, and former diplomat. I've lived and worked all over the world, and I'm the guy you call when you got problems no one else can fix. My wife and I are raising 3 boys, 9, 7, and 5, and that's why we're committed to the future of our state. Now, if Louisiana were just average, we'd all live 4 years longer and get a 33% raise. That's the cost of bad government. I fought for real solutions in the legislature, and while my opponents might have more birthday candles, I know one will fight harder than me to ensure that we have important things to. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Appreciate it. Jackie, you have the next question.
All right, now it's time to get to the issues, and this is a question for everyone. You've all said you are pro-life and support the abortion ban, except if it endangers the life of the mother. Now, the question we have tonight, should the current law be amended to allow for additional exceptions of rape and incest? Mr. Landry, we're going to start with you tonight. In a recent interview with our Capitol reporter, Shannon Hecht, you indicated you would be open to creating exceptions for rape or incest. What is your position tonight? You have 60 seconds.
I don't recall saying exactly that. What I said was that is an absolute difficult conversation. I am 100% pro-life. I have defended our pro-life laws. We've taken cases all the way up to the United States Supreme Court defending those laws. And that is a difficult decision that the legislature, if they so choose to discuss, we can have a discussion and a debate about it and see what comes out. That's what I told her.
Okay, and a follow-up to that, in a letter you sent to the Louisiana State Medical Society, you said, any medical provider who would perform or has performed an elective abortion after the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs is jeopardizing their liberty and medical license. At least one prominent New Orleans physician has said this letter is forcing doctors to make a choice between their own self-interest and the health of their patients. What is your reaction? You have 30 seconds.
That's not true, because I also set that up explaining to the hospitals and worked with the medical board, explaining to them that the exceptions in the current law gives doctors great latitude to make medical decisions, not elective abortions. And so that's an untrue statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. You're up next. You've expressed yourself as pro-life. Now, you also said you believe women should have the right to make a decision with a doctor. So are you saying a woman should have a right to an abortion? You have 60 seconds.
I've been married to the same woman for 28 years. I trust her decisions. I've got a daughter who is 27 years old. I trust her decisions. I know the importance of trusting the decisions of women when it comes to their own bodies and their medical conditions. I've always supported their decisions to support life. Likewise, I don't think it's the place of government or anyone else to be in the room with the doctor when he or she is talking to their patient. Others on this stage have expressed themselves as saying they are against exceptions. I think there should be exceptions. I'm the only candidate that has supported exceptions from the beginning, whether it's life of the mother, rape, or incest. It's unfortunate that the Attorney General has recently signed on with other attorneys generals to talk about finding out when women travel to other states. When does it stop? Absolutely, I trust women's decisions, and that is my position, and it has always been my position.
Okay, and a follow-up. Yesterday morning, you removed the phrase pro-life from your campaign website. So are you pro-choice? You have 30 seconds.
I make a decision for me and my wife and my family. Those are the decisions that we have always maintained, and we have chosen a certain path in life. It is not my place as governor to make those type of health care decisions for themselves or for other women in those positions. It's not the place of the legislature to come between a doctor and a woman, whether it's cancer, diabetes, or maternal health. Those are the facts.
Pro-choice or pro-life?
I've given my position. I am personally a decision maker for me and my family. I am not the decision maker when it comes to health care decisions that are that personal and that complex between a woman and her doctor. Those are decisions that she should be able to make for herself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Mrs. Hewitt, you told the Shreveport Times, exceptions to the ban on abortion are an important conversation deserving more discussion. What exceptions to the current law deserve more discussion? You have 60 seconds.
Well, when the Dobbs decision first leaked out, we were in session, and I worked very hard to make sure that we had legislation on the books, and we amended quite a bit of it because we have been talking about this now for years, to make sure that we had a very clear path to oppose any litigation that might come about I do support the legislation that is on the books right now. The state laws that are in the books provide for exceptions for the life of the mother and the viability of the fetus. And that is exactly where I think we need to be as a state. Any discussion that may prevail in the future is for a future legislature to consider. But I think that I support today the legislation as it exists.
So there are no other exceptions that you think should be discussed?
I have not seen any other exceptions that I could support except what we have right now in current state law.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Lundy, you said you...
He in his remarks, he directed towards me. Under the rules, I get 30 seconds to rebut that.
You do. I'm going to ask Mr. Lundy, and I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
I will.
Thank you.
Yes, and you were correct.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes. Mr. Lundy, you said you think the legislature took care of the state's abortion law, and you agree with what they did. What do you tell doctors who fear going to jail if they determine the fetus is not viable and the mother's life is at risk carrying the fetus to full term? You have 60 seconds.
Well, I'm not a physician. I am pro-life. There's always two victims to every abortion, the mother and the fetus. I know too much about the pain that the mothers feel. 70% of them have issues later in life because they had an abortion. So you can't leave the mother out. Now, as far as the doctor and the patient, you know, I don't believe rape and incest should be the exceptions. I think I know too many people that were born through whatever circumstances that thank God they've had a life. You know, there are things called ectopic pregnancies. Really, the fetus is not in the womb. The fetus will not live, and it becomes a mass, and the mama will bleed out. So a doctor has the discretion to take care of those things because we don't want the mother to die. The fetus is not going to live. So there are things that doctors and patients can deal with, and we make a lot to do over this to try to polarize people. I think the legislative did the right thing. Unfortunately, I believe Shawn Wilson's talking out of both sides of his mouth. He's pro-choice. He's not pro-life. And so anyway, that's my response.
All right. We're going to give you 30 seconds to respond and you 30 seconds to respond, and then we'll hand it over to Dalfred. So, Mr. Landry.
Well, look, I think it's important that this entire issue be focused on women's health care as well. And in the cases that we took, in the admitting privileges case that we took all the way to the Supreme Court, we just recently were able to unseal the documents in that case publicly. And if you would see what was going on in those clinics, it was certainly not, the concern was not the health care of women. And so those are the concerns that I have when I'm talking about who was going over state lines and not.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson, you can address Mr. Lundy's comments.
So, Jackie, there's only one person on this stage tonight that will ever experience that choice of making a decision to have an abortion or not. The reality is those are decisions that are extremely complex. And for me as an individual to make decisions for me, I stand by that decision. Likewise, I am not going to enforce my decisions and my positions on the citizens of Louisiana that are unacceptable and overly complex. Doctors are trained for that. It's important for people to know that as governor, Shawn Wilson will allow women to make the decisions to protect themselves and be safe in every medical condition.
All right, thank you very much. Dalfred?
Thank you, Jackie. Mr. Nelson, you told our Capitol reporter Shannon Hecht under the current abortion law, you think exceptions should be added for rape and incest and to clarify the life of the mother and fetal viability so doctors don't fear going to jail. My question to you is, how do you plan to get support behind your proposal? You have 60 seconds.
Sure. You know, I think that this is an issue that has come to the forefront when the Dobbs decision came down. And so I think that now the legislature will have the opportunity to revisit this. And as governor, like I said, I would support that and I would push it through the legislature. I mean, I think that the rape and incest exception is something that most of the legislature, having been in there, having already voted for this, I think most of the legislature personally believes that. And I think if you look at the polling in the state, most of the state also supports it. And so I think really you just need the courage from a governor to go in there and push what's right. And that's what I did in the legislature. I was one of 4 Republicans who voted for the rape and incest exception, and I would continue to push that as governor.
All right. Thank you, sir. Moving on to Mr. Schroder. You also said you fully support the current law as is. What do you tell doctors who fear going to jail if they determine the fetus is not viable and the mother's life is at risk carrying the fetus for full term? You have 60 seconds to explain.
Well, I'll start off by saying I am pro-life. And, you know, I've been around Baton Rouge for a little while, and it's probably one of the only issues where you saw bipartisan support on the legislation as it is right now. The only other time I watched the legislature agree this much was how they misspend your money. not to mix that with abortion, but it's hard to get the legislature all on in the same page, and they pretty much were. So I support the legislation as is. Look, I've talked to enough people in the last couple of weeks to understand that we have some very particular problems that need to be addressed. And I'm certainly open to listen to that. I think the legislature was wise in what they've done so far. I support the law, what's on the books right now. But certainly being a God-fearing man and caring and loving people, I will sit and listen to these unique problems. I don't want doctors need to know exactly what they can do.
And just to get clarity, what is it that you would tell doctors who fear going to jail?
Well, look, I haven't sat and talked to the doctors about it. I think the doctors need to lay out. I think there's some interpretation problems with the law. The legislators, I've read some of their letters, some of the directives they've made, and I think there's some misinterpretation. That has to be cleared. So we need to get the medical community in the room with the lawyers, with the Attorney General's office, whoever the next Attorney General is, and clarify the positions, because I've seen varying opinions from legislators and doctors.
Okay, thank you, sir. Moving on to you, Mr. Waguespack. As a father of a child with special needs, you've made a point to say you believe the current law is sufficient. But you also believe the state needs to do a more robust job in supporting women who are pregnant. My question is, what does the state need to do? And you have 60 seconds.
Well, let me catch listeners up if they're just tuning in what's going on. Shawn is both pro-choice and pro-life, which makes him either pro-both or pro-neither. Jeff is willing to put doctors in jail and women in jail if they cross state lines to go and service their own health care needs. John's not sure. Where I am is this: I am pro-life. I support the existing law. I want to be there for women, and I don't want doctors to blink in that moment. They have to make the smart medical decision that they need to do to save the life of the mother. That is what needs to happen in those moments. I trust their medical advice. They understand how to work that thermostat because they have the training to do so. Being there for the mother is not just in that moment. It's also going after that. We know we have mental health issues. We have hypertension issues that come after that. We have to put incentives in the Medicaid program also, because a lot of women going in there, they have needs that need to be met. We need to make sure they go for their continuous follow-up care after that. So as we go forward, we're not just caring for the child, but also for the woman itself who is going through the childbirth process.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson, your name was mentioned. I'd like to give you 15 seconds to rebuttal.
Listen, this is a matter of life and death for women, and regardless of what Shawn's opinions are, the outcomes are abysmal when it comes to maternal mortality. The reality is I'm the only candidate that will stand strong with women to provide solutions, real social solutions that will allow them to make the decisions that they need to make to protect themselves and their family going forward.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Landry, your name was mentioned as well. 15 seconds.
Yeah, look, I would say that Stephen, I know he's a lawyer, but evidently hasn't read the law. Again, our office, as the Attorney General, we have clarified that the law has plenty of room to give doctors the decisions they need. What is not proper in the state is an elective abortion.
Thank you, sir. Fred?
Thank you, Dalfred.
He mentioned me, but not by last name, so I think I ought to get 15 seconds.
I do apologize.
That's
We're
all
tight
right.
on time. We have to move on.
So clarify for Mr. Waguespack, I am pro-life.
Mr. Schroder, we do have to move on.
Yes, let's move on. We'll get to that. Thank you. All right, so policing and police relations with the public are hot-button issues in Louisiana, as you all know. Just look at the case that epitomized that issue. That was the brutal beating of Ronald Green outside of Monroe back in 2019. Mr. Wilson, that case continues to fester because the family believes there is still no accountability, and Civil Rights Attorney Ben Crump is now joining the family's cause. Will you meet with the family to discuss their concerns, and what would you do with that information? You have 60 seconds.
Absolutely, I'll meet with the family. As governor, I will always show up. You don't have to worry about Shawn Wilson ever taking a side door to get away from a tough issue. The reality is we have challenges in law enforcement up and down the state's highways and byways. We need to allow individuals to have confidence in the systems as well as confidence in justice. In terms of how we will address it, we have to provide the solutions in terms of giving officers the technology to not only protect themselves, but to document what really happens. Remember, this is all about a cover-up more so than just what actually happened. And if we're honest when people do things that are wrong and deal with the accountability of that, you will have solutions that will make sense and will give families an opportunity to feel like their loved ones who may have been violated have some redemption in that process. And we need to hold the state accountable to make sure we do that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mrs. Hewitt, same question. Will you meet with the family to discuss their concerns, and what would you do with that information?
Well, I have visited with the family at the state capitol and am very aware of this issue. I'll tell you what I will not do is, as governor, I'm not going to get a text message from state police about an incident where a citizen died at the hands of state police and roll over and go to bed and forget about it. I think the cover-up has been with Governor Edwards' office. If you recall, in 2019, this was an election year. And I do not think that as governor he has pursued this case and held state police accountable as he should. Of course, it's all caught up in the legal system now. But I think the family does have concerns. And we do need to make sure that justice is served. I think the lion's share of state police do a remarkable job, and it is a very difficult place to be in law enforcement. But we have to make sure that those that are the bad apples in state police, as there are in any organization or any entity, are held accountable, and then support the state police and the state troopers as we should.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Hewitt. Mr. Lundy, same question. You have 60 seconds.
Absolutely. I would meet with the family. I would review the evidence. I am a lawyer that has practiced, and I have tried many cases and looked at facts and evidence and made determinations on my own. As the governor, I would do that. I would look at it, and I would weigh in on it. You know, I'm not going to pretend to be a law enforcement officer, but I will give them advice. If I see there's failure, which obviously there was in this case, it has to be corrected. People have to be held accountable. All people have to be held accountable. And so if they're not trained properly, we're going to implement training that's going to retrain the state police. They're going to be equipped, and they're going to be taught maybe anger management courses. Who knows what they are, but we can't let this kind of conduct occur again, ever, and it won't happen on my watch as governor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lundy. Mr. Nelson, same question. Will you meet with the family to discuss their concerns, and what would you do with that information? You have 1 minute.
So I'm actually one of the 8 members of the House that was appointed to the special committee to investigate the death of Ronald Green. So I've sat through hours and hours of testimony on this. And I can tell you the situation was heartbreaking. I think as a result of our investigation in the committee that we did in the House, you know, there have been a lot of changes made in state police, and I think that's worth noting. We brought a lot of these issues to light. We brought it to the public, and we really went in and, you know, grilled the leadership in state police to make sure these kind of events don't happen again. It really was an isolated incident with bad apples. We've had some criminal cases that are pending. We have civil cases that are pending, and those will play out. But I would meet with the family, as I already have, just to make sure that justice is done. But I think at the end of the day, we have implemented significant changes in state police as a result of this, and a lot of that was instigated by the House committee that I served on and had hours and hours of testimony on this issue.
All right, thank you, Mr. Nelson. Jackie?
Mr. Schroder, same question for you. Will you meet with the family to discuss their concerns, and what would you do with that information?
Well,
you have 60 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely I'd meet with the family. I would meet with any family, or any person who feels like they've been mistreated in any way, shape, or form, not only by the state police, but any law enforcement unit in this state. Look, here's the bottom line. I would have been up that night. I would have been in Monroe that night. And addressing and finding out what happened. Look, my background, my first professional career was in law enforcement. I have a degree in criminal justice. I spent almost 9 years between the military and law enforcement. You have to hold your command unit accountable, and they have to hold their troops accountable. I think the governor needs to act swiftly and meet with the families or whoever it takes to get to the bottom, and then hold everybody accountable, because you can't make a mistake. Although this is unbelievably tragic, you have to address it, fix it, and not let it happen again. Look, it's paramount that our state police will be one of the best in America, but they're going to be well paid, they're going to be well educated, we're going to train them, but we're going to hold them accountable as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Waguespack, same question. Would you meet with the family, and what would you do with that information? 60 seconds.
Yeah, I would be honored to meet with the family. I think they deserve that right from their governor, the current governor and the future governor. Look, the video that came out that night was horrifying, and anyone who saw that had to think that. But at the same time, we know that there are a number of police officers each and every day that go out and protect and serve us in a very noble and admirable way. So you can't paint a broad brush on the entire law enforcement because of that incident. So to me, the best way to do that is to make sure that there's a proper investigation that happens quickly to know what happened on the ground and who should be held responsible. I would probably also reach out to the Attorney General's office and ask them to assist in this, because you don't want this to become a political exercise. You want it to be a law enforcement investigatory exercise. The people deserve the truth and transparency, and the family deserves closure. And the only way you get that is through a thorough investigation done by the proper authorities. And as governor, I would call that in as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much. Mr. Landry, Will you meet with the family, and what would you do with the information?
Yeah, look, that's a great example of what he said. I would remind the voters out there that I'm the one who has a record of dealing with these cases. I was handed the Sterling case in the first year or so of my office, under which we went through a very thorough investigation. And once that investigation was complete, we did a press conference. We went frame by frame. We met with the family before we issued our decision. So I have a record of doing that. I also have a record of holding police officers accountable. I've sent a number of police officers who use deadly force in a manner that they should not have to jail. So again, I am the person on this stage who has a record of doing both of those things, protecting police officers when they work inside the four corners of the law and putting them in jail when they don't.
Okay, and so to be clear, you would meet with the Green family?
Yeah.
So, thank you very much. Fred, you have the next question.
Thank you, Jackie. Okay, so this next set of questions will just be for a few of you on stage. And we're going to start with you, Mr. Landry. Your opponent on stage, John Schroder, launched a $1 million campaign, television advertising campaign, implying that you are tied to cronyism and corruption. And we want to give you an opportunity to address those accusations tonight. You have 1 minute.
Yeah, look, what you see on TV, unfortunately, does us in those types of attacks, does nothing to focus on the issues that are plaguing the state. The campaign that I've been running since October of last year is focused on those issues. In order to address those, we've actually put up a website for those viewers out there that's going live right now called jefflandry.com/answers. So any of the criticism we get from any of these folks, they can go straight to that website, jefflandry.com/answers. And what you will find is that the things that they're saying are not even true. And there's no water to them. They're trying to make subjections because all they can do is attack me. And again, those attacks do nothing to help the people of this great state. They do nothing to fix crime, nothing to fix education, and nothing to fix our economy.
Thank you, Mr. Landry. Mr. Schroder, you're responsible for the television ads attacking Mr. Landry's credibility. Can you give me a specific example of cronyism or corruption? You have 60 seconds.
Well, there was two people in that ad. Cronyism was directed at one, and corruption was directed at the other. But look, the Attorney General has to live to a different walk and talk than every single citizen in the state, because he is the top cop. He does have to enforce in every law that's broken, okay? And he has to defend 4.6 million people. There's not a bigger issue going on right now other than insurance. And, okay, so let's just say for a second it's not against the law, but how does it look that a trial lawyer firm out of Texas got the biggest fine sent to from the insurance commissioner of $2 million, and the Attorney General took a $5,000 donation 30 days, 45 days after? Okay, it's not wrong, but it looks really bad, it smells bad, and it erodes the public's trust.
Looks bad, smells bad, but does it rise to the level of cronyism or corruption?
Well, absolutely it does. I mean, if the state is going to represent 4.6 million people and we're going to get serious about fixing the insurance problem, don't you think the Attorney General who's going to represent us should be living to a different tone than the rest of us? How do you take the money and then also turn around and possibly open up an investigation against them? How's that happen? Because he would be the one who does it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Schroder. Mr. Landry, you have 30 seconds.
It amazes me how little they understand about how state government works. First of all, those types of investigations, number one on the insurance side, is for the insurance commissioner. If there's a question as to a lawyer's license, that goes to the Supreme Court. I've got over 11,000 donors that span every parish of this state. We've raised over $12 million. This was one check. We have no way to screen who gives us a check or not. But I can tell you, just because you give me a check doesn't mean I will not hold you accountable when it's my job.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Landry. We're going to continue down this road of ads. Mr. Wilson, there is a campaign ad attacking your work as the Secretary of Transportation for the state. The ad claims Louisiana roads got worse under your leadership. going from 39th to 49th in the country. And there is an $18 billion backlog in needed repairs, which required Louisiana drivers to pay an additional $650 a year in car repairs. We want to give you an opportunity tonight to address those accusations. You have 60 seconds.
Well, first, let me tell you, there's only one candidate on this stage tonight that's interested in making you safer, smarter, healthier, and wealthier. And you just heard folks talk about campaigns in this issues in this campaign. Let's talk about the campaign to have extreme policies, whether it's against librarians and women and LGBTQ, and of course the very specific cities of New Orleans, Shreveport, and Baton Rouge. But that's for another day. The reality is we have spent $5.5 billion in the 7.5 years I was secretary, an unprecedented investment, doing 30 years of work that had not been done. So I stand very firmly on that. We have completed over 7,000 miles of work. People don't realize that we haven't adjusted the income for revenue for transportation since 1991. The first time that we get new money is this year. So we put together 2 wooden nickels to make a difference for the state of Louisiana, building projects that have been on the books for decades that have never been done. You can travel to every part of the state and see success, from Baton Rouge to New Orleans to Bossier, all across the rural parts of our state. We have made a huge difference in terms of infrastructure in the state of Louisiana.
Okay. Mr. Waguespack, you and Mr. Wilson worked together in the Jindal administration. You were on the governor's chief of staff, and Mr. Wilson was the chief of staff for 2 secretaries of transportation. You know each other, obviously. Did you expect more from him? You have 60 seconds.
Expect more of him as Secretary of Transportation?
Yes.
You know, look, I actually am friends with all the people on this stage, to be honest with you right now. I have no personal ill will with anyone here, and I think Shawn's a nice guy. Do I think that the Department of Transportation has built a transportation infrastructure that any Louisiana citizen says they can be proud of? No. Is it all his fault? No. Is it Louisiana's history fault? Absolutely. We have not prioritized transportation over the years, and that has to change. And what I'm going to do when I get in there is we're going to make the priorities of what we're going to invest in. No more splash pads, no more neighborhood civic associations, all these little things that the legislature loves to fund and waste our dollars. We're going to find those corridors that are crumbling, those corridors that can lead to job creation, and we're going to put our investment there first. I don't blame Shawn or anyone else here. It is a corrupt system that is decades and decades old that must be changed. And part of the reason I'm running is to put that spotlight on it and cleanse that process once and for all so we can start building the roads and infrastructure we desperately need.
Thank you, Mr. Waguespack.
Fred, can I respond?
Mr. Wilson, absolutely. I'll give you
just
30
15
seconds.
I want to thank Stephen because he validated the fact that I have done everything in my power and that the legislature over the decades have not made those investments. So in this world of criticisms and untruths that you're seeing cast against me, I want to acknowledge the fact that my friend Stephen said the right and said the truthful thing about the infrastructure in the state of Louisiana. So thank you, Stephen.
May I address the truthfulness of that?
No, we have to move on. I'm sorry, Mr. Lundy. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Dalfred, you have the next question.
Thank you, Fred. Now, this next question is going to be for everyone. We will ask for a show of hands and, of course, give you each a chance to respond. Now, you all have stated you are opposed to increasing the gas tax to pay for new roads and bridges, but we have more needs than money to fix all of the problems. So by a show of hands, would you be willing to support adding toll roads in Louisiana? Can we see hands? Okay, looks like everyone's hand is up except Mr. Lundy, and we will start with you, Mrs. Hewitt. You had your hand up saying you would support funding, or rather adding toll roads to support funding for roads and bridges. You have 60 seconds to explain why.
Well, you have to have an all-of-the-above kind of approach. There may be specific opportunities where a toll road makes sense, and there are plenty of states that are doing that. You know, we haven't quite figured out how in Louisiana to pull that off. We have one project in Belle Chase that is underway, and we'll see how well that works. But we do have a huge infrastructure issue, and I'm going to hold Dr. Wilson a little bit accountable. We have appropriated lots of additional funding for roads and bridges in the legislature, historic investments in the last couple of years. But it's not just about having enough money, it's how you spend the money. We have 125 bridges shut down right now in Louisiana. We have 1,000+ bridges across the state. We have to be more proactive in replacing those bridges and maintaining those bridges before we're shutting them down. When you shut them down, you're disturbing all of the commerce in that area. It's a 40-mile round trip for people to go around a bridge that could be shut down for 4 or 5 years or more. So I do think there are things that we can do to make our dollars more efficient in how we disperse infrastructure.
Thank you, Mrs. Hewitt. Mr. Lundy, your hand was
Dalfred,
down.
can I respond to that? She did call my name.
We'll give you 15 seconds.
Yes, absolutely. We have made investments in the state of Louisiana, but the truth is when the legislature allocates resources, they direct those resources to very specific projects. And I will always follow the law. And when those allocations are made, that is the law. And those are the projects that we have built. I don't remember some of these folks on the stage dedicating projects, funding to projects that they now complain
Mr.
about.
Wilson. Moving on to you, Mr. Lundy. Your hand was down. You have 60 seconds to
Sure.
explain how we'll make up that shortfall.
Well, a toll is a tax. If we do things the right way, and I'll just use this as an example, I won't respond to the truthfulness over here from Mr. Wilson. You know, in March of this year, a bridge that was built by the Department of Transportation crossing the Intercoastal Canal in West Baton Rouge Parish was declared unusable, a brand new bridge. They didn't put the pilings in, and so the bridge was sinking. That's in March. He resigned, he quits, he doesn't fix it, and he says he's running for governor in April. And it's costing the state $10 million now. If we would do things the right way, we wouldn't have to be looking at tolls. You know, a toll is a tax. I'm here with a group of audience who says we don't ever want to increase the taxes, but a toll is a tax. They want a toll on the interstate highway. They want to put a toll in Calcasieu River Bridge that we want to build. That was the last thing the Department of Transportation tried to sneak out on the citizens of Calcasieu Parish, and it was addressed at the Civic Center. We don't want a toll.
Thank you, Mr.
Dalfred, can I respond to that?
I'm sorry, we are tight on time. We have to
I
keep
respect
rolling.
your decision.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Nelson, you had your hand up. You have 60 seconds to tell us why.
Sure. So obviously we have a huge infrastructure problem in Louisiana. You know, I'm from Mandeville. Mandeville has a toll road, the causeway that goes across the lake. I think those are the areas where it's appropriate to have tolls, is places where you're providing a shortcut where people didn't previously have a way to get to wherever they needed to go, or you're providing an easier way to get there. I don't think you should use it to replace something that's already existing, like in Lake Charles. I don't think that's an appropriate use of tolls. I think the legislature and I think the state government should really appropriate that money to replace those bridges that have not been maintained. But there is a reason and there is a justification for putting it in somewhere where you're expanding infrastructure that wasn't there before. And I think on the other hand, you have a locally administered gas tax, which is an option. And I think giving locals the ability to establish their own tax is something that I would support. That way the voters and the citizens are able to vote on it. It doesn't go to Baton Rouge and go through the bureaucracy of DOTD. It stays there in local government so that they can fix those problems. And I think if people are willing to vote for that, they should have that ability to fix the infrastructure so they can get to work, they can get to school, and they can do all those things on time.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. On to you, Mr. Schroder. You had your hand raised. You have 60 seconds to tell us why.
Look, I served in the legislature for 9.5 years, and I would tell you the public trust in the infrastructure, as I said earlier in my opening comments, is really about how the departments operate. And look, nobody's going to give DOTD a big A. In fact, you'd be lucky if you get a D. So you first have to restore some trust and faith in the taxpayers. That's why they don't want to pay a tax. The legislators represent people who do not want to pay a gas tax. I mean, that's pretty clear. So you either have to perform better and earn that trust, and then you go back to them. The reason I raised my hand, I wouldn't want to be boxed in and say no to anything. I'm open to tolls. I know the Calcasieu Bridge is a big issue, and the locals don't support it. The truckers don't support it. I think as government officials, it's our responsibility to sit and listen and find out what are the pros and cons. But I don't want to. I'd say yes only because I don't want to be boxed in, and there might be a very good opportunity to use a toll.
Thank you, Mr. Schroder. Jackie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Mr. Waguespack, you had your hand raised in support of toll roads. You have 60 seconds to explain why.
Yeah, I think if you drive in Texas and you're driving around and you get to Dallas or Fort Worth or Houston or name one of your bigger cities there, what you'll notice is they have a smart way of using tolls. It's not the only way to get somewhere. But if you're looking to go in a hurry, you want to go in a fast lane, you want a hot route, maybe you have multiple people in your car, you can choose to make your daily commute easier. I think that's the best way to use toll roads. Right now in Louisiana, we have to find those opportunities where you can find a viable alternative path and use a toll road there. As long as someone has a free alternative, which isn't a toll road, then I think it's a good idea to put toll roads in there to make our daily life easier. Now, the challenge for us as compared to Texas is they have a lot more traffic count. And so there's only so many areas in the state where we can find that traffic count to make those tolls work. But where we can, I think they're a good thing to add as a convenience for people as they drive to their daily commute.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Landry, you had your hand raised in support of toll roads. You have 60 seconds to explain why.
Yeah, I think the citizens of Louisiana need to understand the gravity of the infrastructure problem we have in this state. We've got a $15 billion backlog. In 2007, I think it was a $5 billion. Think about that number. And think about the traffic they sit in. Think about the bad roads we have. We don't even have a maintenance program scheduled. What happens now is the way you get your road fixed is whether or not you vote with the governor or not. And then if you don't, then the asphalt stops at that district. That's ridiculous. That's been happening for 100 years. What we need is, like other states have, a maintenance program for those roads that are in the system already. And then we have to look exactly at what we need and where we can utilize. And some of those solutions may be to toll some of those areas. And so again, I'm the only one that's going to go in and guarantee you that we are going to restructure the Department of Transportation to bring credibility back to that agency in order for the people to understand how we're going to tackle the infrastructure problem here in Louisiana.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wilson, this is your chance to explain why you support toll roads and to defend yourself.
Well, first, let me just tell you, we have a maintenance program already in the state. It's called the Highway Priority Program. That's statutorily required, and I followed the law when I was secretary. And let me remind you, in 2017, we actually had a proposal. It was a bipartisan blue ribbon committee that came up with a plan that would have funded all of these projects in a very traditional way. The legislature voted against the only bill to get out of Ways and Means that would have funded a free Belle Chase Bridge as well as a free Calcasieu Bridge. And I was specifically told by the head of the Republican caucus it was because there was a Democratic governor. I remember that well because there were those who rejected that idea and saw a need for it. A public-private partnership is a wonderful way to leverage resources. I am the only individual who delivered on a public-private partnership, not solely with tolls, but with other competitive revenue, whether it's $50 million over in Belle Chase, $150 million in Calcasieu, a bridge that's going to cost $2 billion. And let me remind you, for all of Louisiana, there are two bridges that are going to cost more than $5.5 billion, and that's how much we spent over the last 7.5 years. So clearly you have to have an all-of-the-above approach, and I'm the only candidate on this stage that understands the realities when it comes to infrastructure.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Fred, the next question is yours.
All right, thank you, Jackie. Again, this question is just for some of you on stage. This summer, the Louisiana Department of Health reported a spike in COVID reports, with Louisiana leading the nation in hospitalizations. Mr. Landry, if faced with another pandemic crisis and if recommended by the CDC, is there ever a time you would support mandating masks, vaccines, and shutdowns? You have 30 seconds to answer.
As governor, I will never allow the government to get in between you and your doctor. I will never let the government get between you and your hairdresser. And I also will not let the government get between you and your priest or your pastor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Landry. Mr. Wilson, what would it take for you to mandate masks, vaccines, and shutdowns? You have 30 seconds.
Well, first, I think it's oxymoronic that we can put the government in between a woman and her doctor, but not when it comes to vaccinations. The reality is you have to follow science. You have to understand data, and this is about life and death. Too many people died in our state unnecessarily because of a risk that was beyond our control. And so as governor, I will make decisions based on science. And so if you're asking me, will there ever be a time that you have to institute masks, but maybe not vaccinations and maybe not shutdowns? That could be something that we do. But it's about how you communicate and work with people. You've got to follow data to protect people. That is the governor's responsibility as the state of Louisiana has demanded of them.
So just to be clear, possibly mandates.
It depends on the situation. I will honestly tell you, until you see what happens, whether you have a spike in Ebola, you absolutely will need some type of preventive things that will protect people. And remember, the mask mandate and other things that were done were there to protect the life of families around this state so that we can have hospital beds and abilities to do it. I remember what it was like not to be able to breathe when you have COVID. That is the reality, and it could have been protected.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mrs. Hewitt, how would you handle another pandemic crisis? You have 30 seconds.
Well, we've proven that so much of what was done before did not work. The COVID shots do not stop you from getting COVID. Wearing the masks does not stop you from getting COVID or giving COVID. So I would not mandate masks. I would not require a COVID shot for children to go to school. I would not shut down the economy. We experienced tremendous economic hurt through those actions of the governor and learning loss in our schools. And there were plenty of other states that did it differently than us. So I would not do any of those things.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Hewitt. Dalfred, you have the next questions.
Thank you, Fred. Mr. Lundy, on to you. Is there ever a time that you would support mandating masks, vaccines, and shutdowns? You have 30 seconds.
No, I will not do that. The evidence is overwhelming that they hurt our children by masking our children. Children learn to talk by looking at the mouths of their siblings and their parents. You don't mask a 3 or 4 year old child, 2-year-old, when there's no risk. The science demonstrated there was no risk. You know, we were told right up front that herd immunity would take care of the problems. So they vacillated so much on that. We didn't rely on the science. And yes, I have a little more knowledge than most on the issue of science. I've read more toxicology reports than probably the CDC has. And so we didn't handle it correctly.
Thank you, Mr. Lundy. Mr. Nelson, same question for you. You have 30 seconds to tell us.
So I was one of the first opponents of the COVID lockdowns. I wrote an op-ed in April or so of 2020 saying this is not the path. I think the science now has very clearly demonstrated that that was not the right answer. The mask mandates were something I opposed too. I think the science also has come in pretty clear. There is no scientific justification for having those mask mandates. I would not implement them. And I think the school closures were one of the most particularly terrible things that we did. You know, the implications of that we're going to be feeling for a very long time. And I saw it in my own children, and I would never do that again.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Jackie, the next question is yours.
Thank you. And this is a question for all of you. In a recent Nexstar Emerson College poll, nearly 2/3 of Louisiana homeowners say they saw a insurance rate increase. Now, many of you have signaled that you will call a special session to deal with the issue. We're going to ask all of you what specifically will be on that agenda. Mr. Lundy, we're going to come to you first. What specific legislation will you tell lawmakers to prioritize to address the insurance crisis? You have 30 seconds.
We're going to make homeowners carriers, they either write a risk for everybody or they don't write a risk for anybody. So they write the same risk for North Louisiana as they do South Louisiana. The rates are going to be reasonable. And so if they don't write in one parish, they don't get to write in any parishes. We're going to bring training for the adjusters. The adjusters were cheaters during these 3 hurricanes that we had in 20 and 21. And so we're going to make sure they're trained. We're going to make sure they comply with the law. We're going to make sure they understand the law because they obviously didn't understand Louisiana law after Hurricane Laura, Hurricane Delta, and Hurricane Ida. So those are some of the changes that we will make. I know that's not enough time for me to tell you it all, but I have a plan. Overwhelming plan for insurance.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nelson, you said our laws drive up homeowners' insurance costs and scare insurance companies from selling policies in our state. What laws would you tell the House and Senate to prioritize to address the insurance crisis? You have 30 seconds.
Sure. So there's one law in particular that's very unique to Louisiana that basically drives insurers to drop all policies in Louisiana if they're going to drop one. I would change that, grandfather in people that are currently covered by it, but allow new policies not to, so we can attract more insurers. I think we also have very excessive bad faith penalties. We kind of use a stick approach to try and get insurers to pay on time. Instead, I think we should use a carrot approach. We give them a tax credit so that they pay out claims very quickly after a storm. It's something that's very important to people, but we really have to look at what works. We got people moving to Mississippi now because they can't afford their premiums in Louisiana, and I think that's a tragedy.
Thank you very much. Mr. Schroder, you have a completely different approach. You are not going to call for a special session. You said you want to take a different approach and have a stakeholder summit to discuss the insurance crisis. How will a think tank of ideas bring about changes? You have 30 seconds.
Well, I didn't say I wasn't going to call a special session. You only have 60 seconds to answer. So I'll call a summit first, okay, because special sessions aren't for free. Before we go into special session, I want to know exactly what the game plan is. So I'll bring all the industry together, the construction industry, home building industry, the insurance industry, the legal community has to be at the table, and we're going to come up with a solution, and then I'm going to call a special session. But I'm not going to call a special session and then go try to figure out what we're going to do. We're going to have a game plan going in. But I will tell you this very quickly. We're going to hold everybody accountable, to include trial lawyers who are preying on this state and the insurers of this state. And if anybody believes what he said earlier about our campaign donations, give me a break.
Time is up. Thank you very much.
You're
we have
welcome.
to move on. Fred, the next question is yours.
Thank you, Jackie. Mr. Waguespack, you said you want to attract insurance companies to come back with big legal changes. So what legal changes would be part of your agenda for the lawmakers? You have 30 seconds.
On the previous question, no mandates, no shutdowns, not ever again. I want to say that on there.
Gotcha.
On this, our legal climate is chasing away business, jobs, industries, truckers, everyone. We all know this. You have to rein in the excessive lawsuits. You have to squeeze collateral source, which has a lot of funny money, excessive settlements that the trial lawyers want to make sure they can protect. Anyone they give a check to, they ask to promise to kill bills to change that in the Louisiana Senate. I have told them I will never do that. My vote is not for sale. I work cleanly and openly with everyone, but I will never sell my vote. That's why they're not donating to me, why they're choosing to donate to others.
So it sounds like specifically it could be tort reform?
Correct.
Tort reform. Okay. Thank you, sir. Mr. Landry, will you call a special session? And if so, in your call, what specific legislation will you tell lawmakers to prioritize to address the insurance crisis? You have 30 seconds.
Well, first of all, we should take a team approach. We have an insurance commissioner. I've already spoken to him, and he believes that we need a special session. So I certainly would support that. Look, I've already taken action when in regards to flood insurance. I've sued FEMA on their 2.0 flood plan, which is driving up flood insurance costs. We were in court last week, so I've already I'm the tip of the spear on this. And then on the other side, I will work with the insurance commissioner to ensure that we have a robust property. And I would remind voters out there that for 8 years, I was under Citizens. I paid out of Citizens when I lived in New Iberia. So I have walked in their very shoes, and it impacts seniors the most.
Just real quick, you would call a special session?
If that's what the insurance commissioner says, because again, we should respect the insurance commissioner. He's a constitutional officer. And I know how it is to have a governor that just bullies around other statewide elected officials. It should be a team effort.
All right, thank you, Mr.
The insurance
Landry.
commissioner has called for legal reform to be in that special session. The question is, will that be on the special session agenda that he calls?
Well,
okay.
How did
15 seconds.
Yeah.
If you want to respond.
Yeah, look, I would remind the viewers out there that under both a Republican and Democrat governor, the one that he worked for, they could have dealt with the trial lawyers, that there would be no tort reform, as long as we just left everything status quo. When I met with him, I told him there is no deal.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on. Mr. Wilson, would you consider deregulating insurance companies as part of your common sense solution? You have 30 seconds.
Well, a common sense solution ought to be an all of the above approach to understand the realities of what we do. So in terms of a special session, absolutely we should have one, and we should look at things like adjuster accountability, transparency requirements, timeliness of decisions, and certainty of payment for individuals who have worked hard to pay their premiums when the companies have left us high and dry. I'll also push laws that will adjust whether or not you have a DWI versus bad credit and which one's going to cost you the most. And the reality when it comes to risk rating 2.0, these storms happened 2 years ago, and now we see lawsuits. The reality is we should be addressing individuals' needs when it happens, and I'm the only candidate that's been on the ground for the last 7 years in every disaster, dealing and loving on people and helping them get what they need to put the pieces together.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mrs. Hewitt, you want insurance companies to set the rates instead of the insurance commissioner. How do you know that won't further price out Louisiana homeowners? You have 30 seconds.
Well, the problem with our situation right now is our regulatory environment does not encourage companies to want to work in Louisiana because they don't want someone else managing their risk portfolio by defining what their rates are, their premiums. So by having them be able to compete in a free market and establish their rates, it allows them to work in Louisiana. But the other problem we have is legal reform. And anybody that believes that Jeff Landry is not going to do tort reform is ridiculous.
We're going to have to leave it there. Dalfred?
Thank you, Fred. Now, as we wrap up the evening, we'll head to your closing statements and give you each 30 seconds. We'll start with you, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. So we didn't even talk about the biggest issue in Louisiana right now, and that's out-migration. We're losing 40,000 people a year because we don't have the jobs and opportunity here in Louisiana. So I've spent the last 4 years in the legislature writing a plan, bringing the tax changes that we'll need to keep jobs and opportunity here in Louisiana. We have Texas and Florida grew 6 times faster than us in the last 10 years. We need to look at those states and bring that kind of tax reform here so that we can keep the best and brightest here in Louisiana, and that's what I will do as governor.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. We'll move on to you, Mr. Lundy. 30 seconds for your closing statement.
Yes. Jeff Landry has already made his decision in fixing the race by having the GOP endorse him before any of these other people got a chance. And, of course, his desire is to have a run-in opposition with Shawn Wilson. Shawn Wilson cannot win this race. We have the worst roads. We have the worst bridges. He has a zero chance of winning the race. If the citizens of Louisiana want an alternate candidate, one who is not playing deals like our governor, they'll choose me. I'm the only one who spent the money to compete with Jeff Landry and win the governor's office.
We'll now head over to you, Mr. Schroder. 30 seconds for your closing statement.
Do you believe government should operate like a business? You got 4 lawyers, 2 engineers, and a business guy. You know, at the end of the day, this is about leadership and real change. As your governor, I will address the cronyism and corruption that infects this state. The rule will be the rules, and it will start with me. If you want that kind of change, vote John Schroder for governor.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hewitt. Your closing statement, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you. The political insiders would lead you to believe that this race is over. And they're also telling you who to vote for. But I think voters are smarter than that. I don't think you want a bureaucrat or a trial attorney to run the state of Louisiana as governor. I think you want a real problem solver, someone who is proven with a track record of results. I'm Sharon Hewitt. I'm asking for your vote for governor. Go to hewitt.com and check out my blueprint and my plan for solving the problems.
Thank you very much. Mr. Waguespack, you have 30 seconds.
If you think Louisiana's doing great, I'm not your guy. If you think these other career politicians can solve the problems plaguing you, I'm not your guy. But if you want someone to come in, bring common sense, conservative solutions for everyone, roll up his sleeves and get to work to fix the affordability crisis, the unsafety crisis, and the untenable crisis we have of keeping our kids here, I am your guy. So I would ask you to give me a look. Go to wagsforla.com and learn more about our campaign.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wilson, 30 seconds for your closing statement.
25 years of bipartisan leadership working under Democratic and Republican governors. There's only one candidate in this race that's going to work to make you safer, smarter, healthier, and wealthier. We didn't talk about education. There's a lot of issues we missed because of time. Visit our website, wilsonforla.com, learn about this movement, and understand what can happen. Unlike others in this race, I'm not intimidated by race. I'm not intimidated by party. We are going to make a difference, and it's time that we stop saying the quiet things out loud and deal with real issues and push forward for a better Louisiana. I am Shawn Wilson, Wilson for Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Landry, you have 30 seconds for your closing statement.
Look, I've been a police officer, a sheriff's deputy, an economic development director, owned a business, and your attorney general for 8 years. I have built a campaign about crime. I have stood in the very shoes of the people that struggle way more than they should in this state. We deserve a state government as good as the people of Louisiana, and we are focused on crime, education, and the economy. And I ask for everyone out there to vote and join me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. I think it was definitely an informative evening. I think our voters will be more equipped as they head to the polls to make a good decision, that is right for them and their family. And just a reminder, early voting starts September 30th. The primary is October 14th. Have a great night.